This is a live shot of Ukraine right now, Kiev, the capital, and you can see it looks quiet there. But the protests against the government from those protesters has raged on. These are different shots now that you're going to see. The smoke, the fires. Today has been called the deadliest day since the conflict began. Let me just give you some of the numbers. 70 people are believed to have been killed. Overall, the total is now close to 100. Again, these are all reports. 67 police officers have reportedly been captured by protesters. Today, Canada and the European Union announced new sanctions on senior Ukrainian government officials. The U.S. has imposed a travel ban, as has Canada. The German and French and Polish ministers continue to meet with both sides in Kiev. Just where that leads, we don't know. So, more violence, more pressure from the international community. But do these measures have any effect? This has been going on for a long time. What will it take to end the ongoing bloodshed? Joining me via Skype from Winnipeg, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Defence, James Bazan, is here. From Toronto, NDP finance critic Peggy Nash is here. And at the convention in Montreal, the Liberal Foreign Affairs critic Marc Garneau is there. You can see it's quiet in the convention centre where he is. It will get a little noisier there. Justin Trudeau will be speaking later. Let me bring in the opposition parties. Peggy Nash, what's your sense of the Canadian sanctions? Are they enough?
Well, certainly we have been calling for stronger sanctions for some time, so we welcome the government's latest move. I can tell you that, the horrific violence that's taking place in Ukraine right now has certainly gripped so many in the Ukrainian diaspora here in Canada, and like many of those who have been election observers in Ukraine, I've been 3 times an election observer there, to see that Maidan Square, the scene of such horrific violence and bloodshed, it really is unbelievable. But I can tell you, I was just out at a rally again this week, and people are concerned that this will get even worse. Yeah. So sanctions are welcome. We'd like to see more. We'd like to see the Prime Minister of Canada maybe pick up the phone, call Mr. Yanukovych, use whatever pressure he can. Canada has a special relationship with Ukraine. We were the first country to recognize Ukraine after it became once again a free independent nation. We'd like to see independent Canadian observers on the ground, perhaps doing whatever is possible to turn down the temperature there, and if there is any way to offer some kind of mediated solution to this, so that the risk of greater violence is toned down and we can perhaps find a political solution. We'd like to see Canada play a role in that as well. We have a very special relationship with Ukraine, more than a million members of the diaspora here, and they're all just heartsick about what's happening.
Right, and by the way, this is it's just starting to escalate. And we're watching the violence. It's shocking to see. But we've gone, I think, if I'm correct here, tell me if I'm wrong, we've got about $300 million in bilateral trade with Ukraine. In other words, it's not a significant amount. Outside of the sanctions today, the economic sanctions and the travel ban, which are clearly still working on the list, is there any other kind of moral suasion, or that Peggy Nash says pick up the phone and try to call the president there? What else can Canada do, if anything?
Well, we're actively engaged.
One thing that I thought we should do, if we can get observers on the ground there, is gather evidence for potential criminal sanctions. When you have a government that attacks its own people, there needs to be consequences for that. And again, when you have observers on the ground gathering evidence there as eyewitnesses, you have the potential for maybe bringing future criminal sanctions against those responsible. We also think that the EU should play a strong role. Our foreign affairs critic Paul Dewar has been in Brussels this week meeting with the EU, trying to push them to become more engaged, and certainly we're also pushing for another emergency debate in the House of Commons next week. Now that doesn't solve the problems, but it does focus the attention of parliamentarians on this urgent situation. But we need to bring whatever pressure we can bring to this situation. People are just heartsick about what's happening. Evan, I was just going to say that one thing I've heard loud and clear from the many people who have contacted my office here in Toronto is people are very, very worried what happens after the Olympics. That there's been this horrible bloodshed this week, but that things will really escalate after the world stops watching in Sochi. So I've heard that concern expressed, and I think that the time is now for us to do absolutely everything possible to prevent any further escalation.
All right. Well, there's a lot of agreement, I know, between all three parties. You're all watching this very closely, and of course, what to do in a very complex developing situation is something we're watching carefully. Mr. Bazan, Ms. Nash, Mr. Garner, always good to have the three of you on the program.
Thanks, Evan.
And again, we've talked to those MPs a lot because this story develops every day. One of the bloodiest days we've ever seen in Ukraine, certainly in this particular conflict. We want to hear from you, though, today. And look, sanctions are here. How effective will these sanctions be, given the limited amount of trade between Canada and the Ukraine? Nonetheless, what else can Canada do? Do you think sanctions will stop the violence in Ukraine? Does it send a strong message? Is that the kind of leadership that has to take place? There's travel bans, there's economic sanctions, lots going on now. What do you think? Go to the ballot box section of the Facebook page, cbcnews.ca.